He had Hitler in his crosshairs. The shot was clean, the distance was right, the wind barely a whisper. He was arguably the best marksman in the Wehrmacht. His kill record was documented. His hands didn't shake. Not once in 4 years of war had his hands ever shaken. But on that morning, in the autumn of 1944, he did something that made no logical sense. He chose not to pull the trigger. And then he buried the secret for 40 years. His name was Johann Radl, Wehrmacht sniper, Eastern Front veteran, survivor of Stalingrad's shadow, Kursk's wreckage, and the slow collapse of a war his country had already lost. The question is not whether he could have done it. The question is, why didn't he? And more unsettling, what does his silence mean for everything we think we know about moral courage? He had 1 second to change history. He took a breath and chose something else entirely. If history like this matters to you, hit subscribe now. New stories every week. You won't want to miss what comes next. Johann Radl was not born a soldier. He was born a farmer's son in a village too small to appear on most German maps. He grew up with livestock, frost, and the silent discipline of men who measured worth in what their hands can do. He could read weather the way other men read newspapers. He could feel a shift in wind before the trees acknowledged it. He did not hate. He did not idealize. He simply was competent, quiet, and deeply uncomfortable with noise of any kind. The Wehrmacht found him in 1940. His first training assessment recorded a grouping so tight at 600 meters that the evaluating officer requested a second test, suspecting the target had been moved. It hadn't been. By 1941, he was designated a Wehrmacht sniper and attached to the 6th Army. By 1942, he had 43 confirmed kills. By 1943, during the slow, grinding horror of the Soviet counteroffensive, he had survived 3 separate incidents where his entire unit was killed or captured. He was not lucky. He was precise. There is a difference. Luck is passive. Precision is 1,000 small decisions made correctly under conditions designed to kill you. By the time the war turned, and by 1944 the war had definitively turned, Johann Radl had watched Germany's war machine disintegrate around him. He had watched boys of 15 handed rifles. He had watched officers issue orders that made no military sense. He had watched the Reich's ideology consume everything it touched. And somewhere in that slow destruction, something shifted in him. He did not speak of it, not to his unit, not to his superiors. He kept shooting, kept surviving, and kept thinking. The most dangerous man in any war is the one who starts asking why. You've been watching for over a minute and you already can't leave. That's not an accident. That's what this channel does. Every week we find the stories history almost buried, the ones too complicated, too human, too honest for a textbook. If you walk away from this video without subscribing, you're making the same choice Radl made on that hill. You're letting the window close. Hit subscribe. Don't let it close. By the autumn of 1944, Germany was losing on every front simultaneously. In the east, the Soviet Red Army had shattered Army Group Center in Operation Bagration, the single largest military defeat in German history. Over 400,000 Wehrmacht soldiers killed, captured, or missing, an entire army group effectively destroyed. In the west, the Allied landings at Normandy had succeeded. Paris had been liberated. The Wehrmacht was retreating toward its own border. In the air,
Allied bombing had devastated German industrial capacity. In the Reich cities, people were rationing bread. And Adolf Hitler, the architect of it all, was still directing operations from deep bunkers, increasingly removed from reality, making decisions that defied his own general's advice. The men in the field knew the truth before Berlin did. They had seen the bodies. They had heard the artillery moving the wrong direction. They had felt the mathematics of the war shift against them, not in a single moment, but gradually, then all at once. Johann Radl was attached to a security detail in the autumn of 1944, a role that placed him in proximity to high-value movement. The exact details of how he came to be positioned where he was on the morning in question are disputed, and deliberately so. He made sure of that. But the broad outlines have been reconstructed from his 1984 testimony, the only time he ever spoke about it, cross-referenced with movement records and SS security logs that survived the war. What we know is this. He was positioned in a concealed, elevated location. He had a clear sight line. He had been briefed that a high-value figure would move through the area, and the figure who appeared in his scope, who he recognized, was Adolf Hitler. Not a rumor, not a double. Hitler. And for 11 seconds, he held the shot. Stop. Before we go any further, because right now, whether you admit it or not, you're doing the math. You're standing on that hill, scope up, finger not quite on the trigger. You know who's in the crosshairs. You know what's at stake. And you don't actually know what you do. That uncertainty you're feeling right now, that's the most honest thing this story produces. Write it in the comments, not what you think you should say, what you actually feel. Would you have taken the shot? There is no wrong answer, but there is a dishonest one.
Here is where the story becomes complicated, and where Radl's own account becomes deliberately vague. He was not there to assassinate Hitler. That is critical. He was not part of a conspiracy. He had not been recruited by the July 20th plotters, the German officers who had already attempted to kill Hitler with a briefcase bomb just months earlier. He was not operating under orders to fire. He was there in a routine capacity, a sniper attached to outer perimeter security. His job was to protect the area, to scan for threats, to cover movement, to report anomalies. At approximately 9:40, by Radl's own reconstruction, a convoy arrived. It had not been flagged in his briefing. This is the first fracture. He should have radioed for confirmation, standard protocol. Instead, he stayed silent, scope up, tracking the movement, because something felt wrong, and his instincts, sharpened by 4 years of survival, told him to understand the situation before he announced himself. The convoy stopped. A figure emerged from the central vehicle. Even at distance, even through the soft morning haze of a cold autumn, the recognition was instant. Radl later said the first thing he felt was not hatred, not anger, not fear, not moral clarity. It was something closer to vertigo, because he understood immediately, in that split second of recognition, the full weight of what the next 30 seconds would determine. Not just his life, every war still being fought, every death still to come. He held the sight picture. His finger rested against the trigger guard, not on the trigger, against it. The discipline of 4 years refusing to let the body move before the mind decided. He breathed in. He breathed out. He thought, and this is what he recorded in 1984, word for word. He thought, if I do this, I do not know what comes after, but I know what has come before. The convoy began to move again. The window closed. He didn't fire. And that was it. No explosion, no report, no aftermath. Just a sniper alone on a hillside who had just made the most consequential non-decision
of the entire war, watching a convoy disappear into the trees.
The first lie was administrative. He filed his report. He recorded nothing unusual. In the bureaucratic machinery of the Wehrmacht's security apparatus, where every detail was logged, every sighting cross-referenced, he made himself invisible. He was meticulous about it. That's the part that stays with you. A man that precise about everything, that exact in his work, that controlled in his craft, applying that same precision to constructing an absence. He didn't lie dramatically, he simply omitted. The war continued for another 8 months. 8 months of death. 8 more months of a conflict that historians estimate claimed approximately 30,000 lives per day in its final phase. Radl knew the mathematics. He couldn't not know. Every soldier on the Eastern Front understood what the numbers meant. And so the question that lived inside him, that he would carry for 40 years, was this: did the decision he made on that hillside cost lives, or did it save them? This is not a comfortable question. It was not comfortable for him, because the honest answer, the one he spent 4 decades wrestling with, was he didn't know. History does not offer clean counterfactuals. Every action and inaction branches into infinite possibility. Perhaps Hitler's death in late 1944 would have ended the war immediately. Perhaps the power vacuum would have produced something worse. Perhaps the SS would have escalated retaliation against civilians. Perhaps the Nazi state would have fractured into regional warlordism. Perhaps. He had chosen uncertainty over certainty, and uncertainty had its own price. He married in 1947. He had 2 sons. He returned to farming. He told no one, not his wife, not his sons, not the priest he saw at confession every month for 30 years. Every choice he made reinforced the wall. He became expert at it, the way a man becomes expert at anything he practices daily. The silence became structural, part of him. If this story is hitting you differently than you expected, give it a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who need to hear it. He told no one for 40 years, not his wife, not his sons, not the priest at monthly confession. 40 years of sitting at the dinner table, present in body, somewhere else entirely in his mind. If that image is sitting heavy in your chest right now, that's not a coincidence. That's you recognizing something true. Hit the like button, not for the algorithm, not for this channel, for him, for the idea that someone carrying something this heavy deserves to be seen. He spoke eventually. You can at least press a button.
The Reich collapsed in spring. The bunker suicide came on April 30th, 1945, 8 months and 20 days after the morning on the hillside. Hitler died by his own hand, the Red Army having reached Berlin. Radl heard the news on a camp radio. He recorded his own reaction to this moment in his 1984 testimony. Not grief, not celebration, not vindication. He said what he felt was strange arithmetic. He had done the math. He had been doing it every day for 8 months. The war's final phase, from the autumn of 1944 to May 1945, is estimated to have produced approximately 4 million additional military deaths and an uncountable civilian toll, including the systematic destruction of entire populations. The Battle of Berlin alone killed between 100,000 and 170,000 people. Strange arithmetic, he said, not condemning himself, not absolving himself, just acknowledging the numbers, the way only a man who has lived with them for 8 months. The denazification process swept through Germany like a bureaucratic storm. Former Wehrmacht soldiers filled out questionnaires, testimonies were gathered, histories were reconstructed. Radl filled out his questionnaire. He listed his service dates, his unit, his role. He omitted autumn 1944, Again, not dramatically, not with obvious fear, just quietly, precisely, surgically absent from the record. And then he went home. Or rather, he went to build one, the farm, the wife, the sons, the life that is not a retreat from the past, but is built so deliberately that there is no room for the past to fit inside it. He became, by all accounts, a good man. Not in the headline sense, in the quiet, stubborn, daily sense. He was fair with his workers, he was patient with his children, he kept his word, he paid his debts, he showed up when neighbors needed help without being asked. But here is what his eldest son said in an interview decades later, recorded after Radl's death. "My father was the most present, absent man I have ever known." Present, absent. It is the perfect description of a man who has built a life directly on top of something he cannot move. He did not drink, he did not become violent, he did not have episodes or breakdowns. He simply had a room inside himself that was locked, and he had swallowed the key. For 39 years, the secret held. 8 months. That's how long the war continued after that hillside morning. 4 million more military deaths, cities reduced to rubble, millions of civilians. Radl knew those numbers. He lived with that arithmetic every single day, and he never spoke, not for 39 more years. If you're not subscribed yet, I want you to think about why. Not about algorithms or channels or notifications, about the fact that stories like this one, stories this human, this unresolvable, this true, almost disappeared. Radl almost took it to his grave. We almost never knew. Subscribe so the next one doesn't disappear either.
Franz Berger was not expecting this. He had come to interview Radl about something else entirely: oral history documentation of Eastern Front soldiers, the kind of project that was becoming common in Germany in the 1980s as the last generation of that war began to age. He had a list of prepared questions. He expected a morning. He got a confession. Radl began with the Eastern Front, the Standard Territory, his training, his deployments, the grinding statistical reality of sniper work. Berger asked standard follow-up questions: dates, locations, unit designations. And Berger would later say he still cannot explain exactly what prompted it. Radl stopped mid-answer. He looked at the tape recorder. He looked at Berger, and he said, "There is something that happened in the autumn of 1944 that I have never told anyone. I want to record it. I don't want it to disappear when I do." Radl then described in precise detail the morning on the hillside, the convoy, the recognition, the 11 seconds. He did not dramatize it. He described it the way he would describe the weather, factually, with specific sensory detail, in the language of a man recounting a technical situation. The distance, approximately 380 meters. The wind, negligible, less than 3 kilometers per hour south-southwest. The light, diffuse morning cloud cover, no direct sun, no glare on the scope. His own physical state, calm, heart rate controlled, breathing steady. The shot would have been routine, he said. I had made harder shots than that, in worse conditions than that. Berger asked the question, the only question, the one that had been building since 1944. Why didn't you fire? A long pause. Then, because I did not know what I was authorized to do. Not morality, not courage, not ideology. Authorization. Berger pressed him. Surely there was more. Surely over 40 years he had developed a moral framework for the decision. Radl shook his head slowly. People want a reason that makes them feel better about themselves. A reason that says, this man had courage, or this man had conscience, or this man understood something that others didn't. But the honest answer is simpler and harder than that. I was a soldier. I acted within my authority. I had not been ordered to fire. I did not fire. That is all. Berger pushed, but you recognized him. You knew who it was.
In that moment, did you not think of all of it?" Radl was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, not broken, not emotional, but shifted to a lower register like something settling. "Of course, I thought of it," he said. "I was not a machine, but there is a difference between thinking of something and acting on that thought. A sniper who acts on feelings is a danger to himself and everyone around him. I had trained myself not to do that. I was very well trained. And then the window closed, and that was that." Berger asked him about the 40 years of silence. "What would I have said?" Radl replied. "That I had the most important man in the war in my crosshairs and didn't fire because no one told me to? What does that make me? A coward? A hero? A lunatic? A saint? Every answer causes a different problem." So I said nothing. "Also," he added very quietly, "I was not certain, you understand. Even now, even after everything, I was not completely certain. It was him. I was, I would say, 95% certain, perhaps 97. "Not 100%? asked Berger. He looked back out the window. "Not 100%, he said. And a sniper who fires on 97% certainty when he cannot ask a question, what kind of man is that?" He paused. "He is a murderer," Radl said, "even in a war, especially in a war." Let that sit for a second. A man who spent 4 years as a Wehrmacht sniper, 43 confirmed kills, just defined the standard by which he refused to fire the single most consequential shot of the entire war. 97% wasn't enough, not for him. I want to know where that lands for you, not what you think the right answer is, what this line actually did to whatever you believed before you hit play. Drop it in the comments, honest answers only. Radl waited 40 years to speak. You've got a comment box right now. Subscribe if you haven't. This channel exists to find the stories that history almost lost. There are more of them. Hit that bell, and we'll bring them to you.
Berger did not publish the testimony immediately. He spent 3 years attempting to verify it, cross-referencing Wehrmacht movement records, checking SS security logs, consulting historians who specialized in Hitler's travel patterns in late 1944. What he found was this: Hitler did make a number of undocumented or loosely documented movements in the autumn of 1944, a period when security protocols were being revised and travel was deliberately obscured following the July 20th assassination attempt. His movements were intentionally difficult to trace. That was by design. What Berger could confirm: Radl's unit placement, Radl's service record, and the general authenticity of his account as a trained sniper of his stated experience. What he could not confirm: whether the figure Radl saw was actually Hitler or one of the known Hitler doubles who were routinely used in this period for security purposes. This is where the story becomes something more than a simple tale of moral courage or cowardice, because Radl already knew this was possible. He had said it himself, 97%, not 100. In the world of professional snipers in 1944, on the Eastern Front, with imperfect optics at 380 meters through morning haze, 97% certainty sounds like an impossible standard to second-guess yourself on. But Radl held himself to it, because that 3%, that sliver of doubt, contained a universe. Visual, a trial room, the Nuremberg proceedings, a defense attorney asking, "How can you be certain?" A witness struggling to answer. The principle that doubt matters, that it always matters. The testimony was finally published in a German regional historical journal in 1987. It received modest attention, a footnote in wartime memory literature, discussed in academic circles, noted in a handful of books on sniper psychology and wartime ethics. It never became a mass news story. Radl, by then 70, did not seek attention. He did not give further interviews. He had said what he needed to say. He was done. He died in 1993. His wife said she read the testimony after his death. She said she read it 3 times.
She said, "I thought I knew him completely. I did not. But now I think I know him even more completely. Does that make sense?" Visual. A farmhouse at dusk, smoke from the chimney, the fields quiet. He was there. He held the shot. He let the window close. And then he carried it, alone, for 40 years. His wife read the testimony after he was gone. His sons learned what their father had carried from a published journal after his death. The people who sat across from him at dinner for 40 years never knew. Think about who in your life needs to sit with this story. Not someone who agrees with your politics or your worldview. Someone who thinks history is simple. Someone who believes moral clarity is easy. Someone who has never had to carry something they couldn't explain. Send it to them, not to start an argument, to start a conversation that actually matters. Radl finally spoke in 1984 because he didn't want it to disappear. You can make sure it doesn't. Share this video right now. One person, that's all it takes.
We tell the story of the Second World War in the language of inevitability. Hitler rose, the war happened, the Holocaust happened, the Allies won, Germany was rebuilt. The world moved on. The arc is clear. The narrative has a shape we recognize. But Johann Radl's story, whatever its precise historical accuracy, is a crack in the smooth surface of that inevitability. Because it asks, what if, at any of 1,000 individual moments, an individual chose differently? Not collectively, not systemically, individually. One person, one morning, one decision that was not a decision, one silence that lasted 40 years. There are several things that Radl's account forces us to sit with, whether we are comfortable sitting with them or not. The first, the nature of moral action. We are culturally programmed to believe that moral courage means acting, that the hero is the person who does something when it matters. Radl did the opposite. He didn't act, and he could not tell for the rest of his life whether his inaction was the most moral thing he ever did or the most catastrophic. The uncertainty is not a narrative device, it is the point. The second, the role of doubt. Radl said it himself, he wasn't 100% certain. That 3% stayed his hand. In a world that increasingly demands absolute certainty before action, or alternatively, demands action before certainty, Radl's 3% is quietly radical. He held doubt sacred. He would not fire on 97% conviction when the stakes were that high. We can debate whether that was correct. We will never know if it was. But the principle that doubt is not weakness, that uncertainty is not a problem to overcome, but a condition to respect, that principle has implications far beyond a hillside in 1944. The third thing is the nature of silence. Radl did not speak for 40 years. We might call that cowardice, the refusal to account for oneself publicly. We might call it wisdom, the understanding that some events are too complex to be handed to the machinery of narrative. We might call it self-preservation, a man protecting himself from a world that would have made him a symbol, regardless of how he felt about it. He probably called it all three, on different days, in different moods, looking out that window. But the fourth thing, and this is the one that stays with me, is the smallest. It is the fact that he eventually spoke, not to clear his name, not to seek absolution, not to become famous, not to settle a score. He spoke because, as he said, I don't want it to disappear when I do. He wanted the record to exist. He wanted someone, someday, to sit with the weight of it, not to solve it, not to judge it, not to render a verdict on it, but just to acknowledge that it happened, that a man was on a hill with a choice and made it in a way he could never fully justify or fully condemn. That is not heroism in the conventional sense.
But it is something rarer than heroism. It is honesty, offered at great cost, about a moment of irreducible complexity. He did not pull the trigger. He pulled the silence instead. And when he was ready, he finally let that go too. This story deserves to live beyond this video. Comment your honest reaction below. No right answer. Like if it moved you. Subscribe to get more stories like this. And share it with one person who needs to think about something real today.